into the Patrick Party. We're excited you've joined us for our Iron Bowl edition of Patrick Party Pregame as we cap off this 2021 regular season. What a show we have in store for you, and we're glad you joined us here early this Saturday morning as we get ready for a number of big rivalry games, but specifically that 86th edition of the Iron Bowl coming up just shortly on CBS at 2:30 Central Standard Time. So thanks for joining us. This will be most likely the final Patrick Party pregame of the year. It's the last one of the regular season. Conference championships are next week. Of course, we all know Auburn's not playing in the conference championship, so we'll see if I do anything with that. But we certainly wanted to go out with a bang today with the Iron Bowl in town, and we're excited you joined us. So let's go ahead and just get right on into it rather than hinting around. So let's go ahead and start. Let's set the stage. It's been a great Thanksgiving so far. Hopefully you were able to spend time with your friends and family. But let's go ahead and recap some of those Thanksgiving Day games across the sport. Of course, there were NFL games, but we're just going to talk about college football here this morning on the Patrick Party. So we go ahead and started off on Thanksgiving night. The Egg Bowl took place between Ole Miss and Mississippi. Mike Leach and Lane Kiffin. Of course, 2 years ago, the last time it was in Starkville was the Miss-dismissed game where the Ole Miss player scored the touchdown, the tying touchdown against Mississippi State, of course, with an extra point, goes out into the end zone for his celebration and gets down and acts like he's a dog peeing on the field, which was a little bit weird. And then the extra point. So then there's a penalty. The extra point gets backed up. Then they miss the extra point, so they don't tie Mississippi State. Mississippi State ends up winning, and then Ole Miss fires their coach for that and other reasons later. And so, hence the name. But in this edition between Lane Kiffin and Mike Leach, not too much craziness. There wasn't any big quotes or anything, but the number 9 Ole Miss Rebels got to 10 wins for the first time in program history. First time in program history, 10 wins for Ole Miss. As Lane Kiffin said this week, Ole Miss is undefeated in 49 out of the 50 states. I'll let you figure out which state beat up on the Rebels. Then on Friday, we had a number of games, some good, some not so good. But I do think these Thursday and Friday games, the Thanksgiving weekend, can highlight games that would get lost in the shuffle on Saturday, like the Egg Bowl. It would have been big this year, but it still would have been competing with the Iron Bowl, with Bedlam, with the game, all the things. So on Saturday, Kansas State, Texas. Texas able to not end their season on a losing streak. They had a 6-game losing streak after starting pretty good, and they were ranked up real high, and they were on a 6-game skid in their first year under Steve Sarkisian. But Texas was able to beat Kansas State 22-17. Also had Iowa against Nebraska. Iowa number 16 in the country. Big thing in this one, Nebraska yet again gets a big lead, but the lead does not hold. Iowa was able to come back and end up winning by a touchdown. Number 25, Arkansas took on Missouri, and their battle line, I didn't know that rivalry had a name, but they have a trophy and everything. Arkansas went 3-0 in trophy games this year. They have a trophy with Texas A&M when they play. I believe it's in the Southwest Classic. It's the one in AT&T Stadium in Dallas. Then, of course, they play for the Golden Boot, the trophy of Louisiana and Arkansas, between LSU and Arkansas. They won that game against LSU in dramatic fashion, I believe in overtime. And then just yesterday, they were able to beat Missouri at home. Arkansas had a fabulous season. No one really saw it coming. I think you could have gone out on a limb and said, I think Arkansas will make a bowl game. 6-6, that'll be great for Sam Pittman. And that would be great. Missouri went 6-6, which I think is also a huge accomplishment for the Tigers. Arkansas went 8-4, ranked 25, and won 34-17. Another great game for KJ Jefferson. In the Battle of I-4, UCF and USF played in Orlando. Of course, Gus Maslon at his table, I thought a fair point was brought up that with Gus, he hurt his leg, I believe, something with his leg, so he can't walk. And, of course, he's not going to be walking on the sidelines. I thought, well, why don't you just go be like a coordinator and go sit up in the press box? For Auburn University, Mike Bobo and Derek Mason do that. I feel like I don't think that'd be a bad idea. You could see a different perspective. but he decides to be at a raised table on the sidelines, and he's still yelling at people from the table. So it's kind of an interesting little setup they had. UCF had a big, I believe it was goal line stand, and beat USF 17-13. Utah capped off another good season, advancing to the Pac-12 championship game with a 28-13 win over Colorado, and then the thriller, in my opinion, NC State beat North Carolina 34-30. NC State rushed the field. I believe they advanced to the ACC championship game, and truly was a crazy game. UNC had like a 10-point lead at one point, but that final drive, NC State was able to drive down with the help of North Carolina. And of course, I wasn't watching it that closely, but there were a lot of penalties on North Carolina that helped get NC State close to the end zone. But they were able to score and beat the Tar Heels, who were really hyped up at the beginning of the season, Sam Howell and Mac Brown. And they have a good team. Well, maybe they don't. They're 6-6. They're a lot like Auburn. Kind of sad. But that's it for our Thanksgiving week round of games that have already occurred. And then, of course, we have our Saturday slate that we'll go through a little bit later in the show. One other thing I wanted to go through prior to Saturday slate is our coaching carousel. So that's always fun to kind of go through and see what in the world some teams are doing. And I think it was predicted last year, not many teams making the change. Of course, Auburn, one of them, actually making a change. Texas, too, hiring a new coach. But a lot of teams were like, COVID, money, let's time out for a minute. And I think that's a fair assessment. But jobs have been open since very early in the season. USC being one of the first ones, they fired Clay Helton. LSU parted ways with Ed Orgeron in the middle of the year. Just last Sunday, Florida fired Dan Mullen. Washington State fired their coach. Washington fired Jimmy Lake. And then TCU fired Gary Patterson. Actually, yesterday it came out Sonny Dykes, SMU's head coach, is going to go to TCU. So now the SMU job is open because Sonny Dykes left SMU to now advance to TCU and be a part of the Big 12. So that is our coaching carousel names. I'm not going to go through every job and be like, this is who they should hire, because honestly, who knows? There's hires that made perfect sense, like Tom Herman at Texas, that didn't work out, and there are hires that made no sense, and everyone's like, what the hell? When like Gene Chizik got hired at Auburn, guess what? He's a national champion. So who really knows what in the world's up with all this? It's kind of crazy. I don't think that would be a fun job. It'd be fun, but it'd be kind of hectic and a little stressing too. But names just floating around. Dave Aranda at Baylor. He has an LSU connection. Of course, the defensive coordinator when the Tigers won the national championship back in 2019. Also has LA connections. He grew up in LA, so USC could be on the market. His name's been big in that Washington job. He's someone. Lane Kiffin, everyone wants to talk about. Maybe he could bounce off. I think Ole Miss is the perfect spot for him, but we'll see. Mario Cristobal at Oregon has been rumored for some jobs. Lincoln Riley has been talked about at LSU. Of course, LSU, a lot of people think they might try and go after Jimbo Fisher. Whether he goes or not, I don't know. But those are just some names. I mean, of course, and then there's always, literally every time Florida gets open, they're always like, well, Bob Stoops could come. Bob Stoops could come out of retirement. He could come from Oklahoma. I don't think Bob Stoops is coming. But he used to coach at Florida many years ago, and so that's always the big connection that Florida people like to say. Now, I don't think that'll end up happening. But, of course, it does simply exist. So, yeah. Coaching carousel, always kind of fun. And, I mean, you never know. You literally never know with some of these schools. I mean, Texas fired their coach, like, after the season and just went out and hired Steve Sarkisian, just out of the blue. So, it's always crazy. But let's go ahead and get on into, our actual program a little bit. Let's get into the Saturday slate. We're going to go through 10 of what I think are the best games and games you need to see if, of course, you're able and have multiple ways to watch games because a lot of them are at the same times. So you might be flipping around on that guide on your cable box if you haven't cut the cord yet, like me, and we'll go through them. But let's go ahead and get into what is considered just good old-fashioned hate. That is Georgia versus Georgia Tech. Of course, the number one, the top dogs, as they're being referred to nowadays, just on their title run. I mean, it's just so depressing, people, because I want Georgia to lose. I want them to lose. It's not because I want them to lose. Well, I do. But, I mean, it's been 40 years. It's been since 1980 since they've won a national championship. It's been since 1982 that they've gone 8-0 in the SEC and got undefeated. Like, it's been a hot minute since Georgia's been good. Like, think of how many times Auburn's at least gone undefeated. Like 5 times since then or something. So, well, maybe not 5, but a lot of times. So, I mean, at one point it's like, well, good for them, but at the same time it's like, no, no, I like to make my 1980 jokes on Twitter, so you need to lose to somebody. Well, it's not going to be Georgia Tech. This Jeff Collins situation, they brought him in. He really tried to up Tech. I mean, it was a dramatic change if you think about it between, the change in the offense, going from that triple option to like a real, not the triple offense, not a real offense, but like a balanced, like they actually throw the ball now. But it is not, for whatever reason. At the end of the day, he's done a lot of great things, I think, for their program and things that needed to happen. But a football coach is paid to win football games, and that's just something Georgia Tech struggled with. Georgia's a 35-point favorite. Georgia can name the score on this one. Their defense is electric, and they'll be able to stop Georgia Tech. And, of course, Georgia's offense has been good enough all year long to keep the Dogs in it. But that one will be in Atlanta, even though I have a feeling there's going to be a lot more red than any other color in that stadium coming up in a couple hours. Okay, next up, we have the lead-in from their Fox's pregame show. I forget what it's called, but they're really excited. They've been hyping this game up pretty much all year, but specifically this week, it's the biggest. It's honestly the biggest game of the year, and it's pretty exciting. Of course, you have number 5 Michigan taking on number 2 Ohio State in the game, as it's called. Probably with the Iron Bowl as being like one of the top rivalries in the sport. So, I mean, it should be a really fun one. I saw it snowing in Ann Arbor yesterday. But the biggest key is, will Jim Harbaugh finally beat Ohio State? He has not done it yet. And they showed a graphic. It's not like Michigan's had bad teams. Michigan's had 9 10-win teams very consistently under Harbaugh. But Ohio State is the team. It's been a consistent loss every year since he's been there. And so it's like, can they finally get it done? They've been in this position before. They've hosted Ohio State in big games before. But can they finally get over this hump? Part of me is like, sure, like they have a really great team this year, but it sounds like, I'll see it when I believe it kind of thing. So we'll see if Michigan can do it. Ohio State blew out Michigan State just last week. Their offense looks incredible. They moved up to number 2 in the polls, and I really think Ohio State is that team that is going to challenge Georgia and might actually be able to challenge that defense and give them a little bit of a run for their money. They have some incredible receivers, and I think Ohio State is probably the best bet at this point to take down the Dogs in what would likely be a national championship matchup. But I think this will be a good one. Of course, we'll do our picks in a little bit in a fun fashion later. So next up, we have number 8 Baylor. Of course, like I said, Dave Aranda has been mentioned all week for all these jobs. And of course, Saturday, the second, well, I don't know, because Baylor could play for a Big 12 championship. So you might not be able to, quote unquote, like talk to him / touch him until much later. But Baylor's got a big win against Texas Tech. The whole Big 12 thing is very odd. I'm confused on how it's all working. So I can't really tell you who's going to play next week. But you can look it up if you want to. All I know is Baylor's had a really good season. Like, props to Dave Aranda. They're number 8 in the country. They moved up in the polls. They're playing Texas Tech today, and they're a 14-point favorite. This all-time series is tied at 39-39 and, of course, one tie. So that's pretty cool. Texas Tech, of course, they fired their coach pretty early into the season, and they went ahead and named a Baylor assistant to be their head coach. Now, I don't know if this Baylor assistant is still on Baylor or what the whole deal is, because it's honestly kind of weird to hire a new coach in the middle of the season. But that's what they did. So there might be some Baylor people going over to Texas Tech and vice versa. So it's going to be an interesting game. I do think the Bears will be pretty successful today at home in Waco. Next up, we have what Charles Barkley called on College Game Day in 2017. I believe the last time they were in Auburn, actually. He said, oh, this is 2 ugly girls fighting. It's Florida State. They both suck. Well, guess what? They both suck again. And he's not wrong. Florida, of course, just collapsed this season. And Dan Mullen getting fired lots of things coming out about Dan Mullen, about all these things, and people are mad, so they change. Florida State has sucked since Jimbo left. Honestly, Jimbo's last year wasn't very good before he went to Texas A&M. So they're both playing for bowl eligibility. They're both at 5-6. I mean, honestly, who cares if Florida goes to a bowl game because like they're getting a new coach anyways. No idea who they're going to hire, by the way. And then Florida State, they need a bowl game. Good Lord, they have just struggled. They beat Miami. They've had some positive moments, but at the same time, they've had some, like, they lost to Jacksonville State at home. So that, it's been that kind of season for the Seminoles. Another one of those kind of seasons. So we'll see if Florida State can kind of turn it around against Florida today in the Swamp. But hey, Florida, even without a head coach, is still a 2.5-point favorite. Next up, we have Michigan State. A big one in the Big Ten. Honestly, kind of the third place game, let's be real. All in that one side in the Big Ten East between Ohio State, Michigan State, and Penn State. Kind of third place, but both of these coaches got a huge raise this past week. Mel Tucker and James Franklin, I believe, both agreeing to 10-year deals, $9 million-ish, like just but tons of money. Michigan State has had a really good year. James Franklin kind of off and on, but his name has been mentioned for USC, some other jobs, and so we'll see. But now he's staying, so actually we won't see. That really didn't make any sense. So in this game specifically, this one will be in East Lansing, Michigan. I think it could be a good one. Problem is Michigan State's pass defense really, God, I mean, we all knew they weren't very good, but they got exploited against Ohio State, and we'll see if Penn State, who Sean Clifford's kind of been hurt and not hurt, it's been a weird situation, if they can try to exploit that in this one. Next up, we have a big game in the Big Ten West. Wisconsin can clinch the Big Ten West and get a date with either the Buckeyes or the Wolverines in Indianapolis, which is also where the national championship is, if they are able to beat their arch rival in Minnesota, the Golden Gophers. So we'll see if number 14, Wisconsin, they really did not have a good start to the season. They kind of fell back. But then the Badgers, for whatever reason, turned it on. And guess what? They might be back in the Big Ten Championship. So, props to them. So this should be a fun one. This will be on Fox and that 3 o'clock hour. All right, next up we have Ed Orgeron's final game at LSU. It's at Tiger Stadium. Of course, Jimbo Fisher and the number 14 Aggies are coming down. So, of course, it's going to be emotional for that and that whole thing. I feel like he has handled that situation and leaving very well. So, props to Edo. But at the same time, LSU's trying to find a new head coach, and a lot of people think that they might try and offer Jimbo Fisher the job in that visiting locker room in Tiger Stadium. I don't think Jimbo Fisher will leave. He might, though. You never know. But I think they'll at least offer him the job. But we'll see. I mean, who really knows these days? But I think it should be a fun one. I think LSU, while they've had a bad season, they could actually clinch a bowl game of all things, which I think would be really awkward. Like, let's think about this for a minute. LSU, clinches a bowl game. Does Ed Orgeron stay their head coach through bowl season and coach them in their bowl game, and then LSU LSU doesn't hire a guy until after the bowl game? Or does LSU hire the guy before and Ed Orgeron's still there? Or do they just say, Ed Orgeron, regular season's over, get out, but this bowl game is meaningless? Very weird, because they said they parted ways after the season. So, I don't know. But I don't think they're going to win tonight, so honestly, it doesn't really matter. All right, next up we have Bedlam, which, when you look back, this is a big game. Let's talk about this game first. Number 7, Oklahoma State. Number 10, Oklahoma. The winner of this game will for sure be in the Big 12 Championship, and then depending on what happens with Baylor and who's beating who, we'll kind of go from there. And to determine the second team. But this is definitely a big one. When you look at this series as a whole, Mike Gundy is by far the best coach Oklahoma State's ever had. He's only beaten Oklahoma 2 times, people. 2 times. And of their 70 matchups, Oklahoma State's beaten Oklahoma maybe 14 times. It has been dominated by the Sooners for how quote-unquote great of a rivalry it is. And it can be a great rivalry. And Oklahoma State's a 4-point favorite at home. But can I mean, we all talked about Jim Harbaugh and can he beat Ohio State? Can the Cowboys beat the Sooners? Like, can we do it? I don't know. We're going to find out. Oklahoma's looked very beatable this year. Oklahoma State's looked very good. It's one of the better teams they've had in a minute. It's going to be a big one. This will be ABC Saturday night. Then we have the rivalry game between Clemson and South Carolina. This one will be in Williams-Brice Stadium. The announcer, the play-by-play guy on ESPN, called it Willie B last week. Who has ever referred to Williams-Brice Stadium as Willie B? That's like not a thing. But I thought it was hilarious. So, but they'll be playing in Willie B, I guess. The number 23 Clemson Tigers now do not have a chance for the ACC championship. NC State has won. That is over. But they have looked a lot better in recent weeks. And so has South Carolina. Props to Shane Beamer. Like, wow. I mean, they beat Auburn, so, like, #petty. But at the same time, they have had a great season. Nobody would have ever dreamed South Carolina was going to go to a bowl game this year. For how bad it's been, props to them. I don't know what he's doing down there, but it's working. So good job, South Carolina. I still don't think you're going to beat Clemson. Because at the end of the day, while South Carolina's been playing great, Clemson is just another beast. And I don't know what to say. Their talent is just so much better. So much better. And then, for the 86th time, the Tide and the Tigers will face off in the Iron Bowl, this time in Jordan-Hare Stadium, as the number 3 Alabama Crimson Tide have already clinched the SEC West. They'll have a date with the Dogs next week in Atlanta. Of course, Auburn, a disappointing slide. Everyone talked about, and I said it in my podcast, if you haven't already listened, Spotify and Apple Podcasts, Patrick Party Podcast. Hey. When Auburn was playing Texas A&M, all their goals were intact. They could run, if they ran the table, they controlled their own destiny. If they beat Alabama, they'd go to the SEC West Championship. And everyone's like, everyone's thinking this is like 2017 again. We're getting those vibes. It could be a November to remember. It has not been a November to remember. It has been a no-win November. Auburn lost to A&M. Auburn lost to Mississippi State. Auburn lost to South Carolina. And now I'm really sad. But, I mean, as it's been said, it can all get turned around if you win this one game. Now, it's very, very ironic. And I said this in my podcast, so if you've already listened, sorry, I'm repeating my thought because I think it's a good one. If you go all the way back to the beginning of the Brian Harsin era, and I still think he's going to be a good coach. First seasons are crazy. You typically have a game you're not supposed to win in games. You do win. Like, I'm not saying he's a bad coach. I still think he was the right guy. All the things. I have faith in him. It's been a weird year. It's the first year of a head coach. They're always weird. I mean, hell, Auburn went to the national championship with Malzahn. Like, it's weird. I don't know what to say. Pat Dye went 5-6. So, you never know. Kirby Smart went 7-5. Nick Saban lost to Louisiana Monroe in a bowl game. Or maybe that was actually at home. So see, you never know. But when you go back, it's a little funny because when you go back, all the way back to the introductory press conference on Christmas Eve, 2020, they have the whole introductory thing, and they take the picture with the jersey, and he talks, and he talks, and he talked way more than Malzahn. Nobody was ready for it. And then they finally get to questions from the reporters. First one's from someone from AL.com, and they say, Coach, what's it going to be like going against Alabama? How are you going to beat Alabama? Pretty much what they said. And his response, and I think it was a good response, he said, you can't just wake up and beat Alabama. You have to go 1-0 every single day. You have to prepare to beat every team in front of you. And if you can beat the teams in front of you, you can get yourself into a position where you can play a game like that. That's why you take the Auburn job to play in games like that, so you can try and beat Alabama. And you can beat Alabama. They're beatable. And it's ironic because Auburn's doing the opposite on Saturday. We've not beaten the teams ahead of us. We didn't beat Mississippi State. We didn't beat South Carolina. We have injuries. We're pretty much just trying, no offense, but we're trying to wake up and beat Alabama. And that pretty much goes against everything he said. It's been preached consistency. And that's important. That's a good thing. But Auburn's been consistently bad in November. I don't know what to say. We've been consistently inconsistent. Who knows? I don't know what Auburn team's going to come out. The first half Auburn teams that have gotten 14-point leads and 28-3 leads against Mississippi State, or the second half Auburn team that pretty much could not stop Mike Leach's offense, and South Carolina was able to run over that defense. I don't know what to say. All that to say, it is the Iron Bowl, so you never know. And it's in Jordan-Hare Stadium. It's a place where Nick Saban has struggled. Alabama has struggled. I mean, not even just Nick Saban. Alabama has struggled in Jordan-Hare Stadium. Now, he has won the games he's supposed to. We all remember that 15 game when Auburn was 6-6, went to the Birmingham Bowl. Alabama on their title run, they were able to get the job done. Also, same thing in 2009. That was a crazy game. So we will see. We're going to talk a ton about the Iron Bowl in this second half of the program. But first, before we look at this year's Iron Bowl, let's take a look back. We're going to go through our Iron Bowl games to remember as we go ahead and kick it off in 1893, people. 1893, the first ever Iron Bowl, the first ever time Auburn and Alabama played. And there's a little bit of a dispute here because the season before, in 1892, Auburn played Georgia, and Auburn, beat Georgia in the first ever Deep South's oldest rivalry. We talked about that on pregame prior to the Auburn-Georgia game. And Alabama got together a team in that season and claimed they played, they did play the game, but, they played against and it says it on Wikipedia, quote unquote. Well, actually, I'm not reading it, so it's not a quote, but a group of local Birmingham high school players. Not even a team, but just a random group of them. And they won really big. And so then when Auburn and Georgia celebrated their 100 years, Alabama celebrated too because they're like, oh, we played this group of Birmingham people. And it's like, no, your first college game wasn't until the first ever Iron Bowl. But whatever, it's just Alabama getting upset about something stupid. But that's them. But Auburn won the first ever Iron Bowl. So, hey, where you go for that? Next up, we go to the 1949 matchup. And prior to that, from 1907 until 1948, the two universities did not play due to many disagreements. I was reading about it this week. They were upset about the player per diem. They were upset about how many players you could bring, where to get the officials from, where to play the game, all these weird things. And so they didn't play for 41 years, which is kind of wild. But then they were able to play, and they were able to resume the rivalry. And then in 1949, Auburn upset Alabama 14-13. This is considered one of the greatest upsets ever. Honestly, couldn't tell you why, but I had a couple people tell me that, and I was like, you know what? For Iron Bowls to remember, we'll just put them in there. And then, of course, we all remember, well, I say we all, honestly, my grandparents watching remember this. Of course, I wasn't alive. My dad wasn't alive. But any old Auburn fan definitely remembers the Bama punt game. In 1972, down 16-3 late in the game, Auburn blocked 2 punts and returned both for touchdowns, leading to an improbable 17-16 Auburn win and coining the new phrase among Auburn fans, Pump Bama Punt. So, that was the 1972 edition. Then we moved to 1982. The Crimson Tide of Alabama had won 9 in a row against Auburn. And then, with 2 minutes left, Auburn drove down the length of the field in year 2 of the Pat Dye era and scored a touchdown with running back Bo Jackson, who would eventually go on to win the Heisman, as he jumped over the top of the defensive line. Auburn won 23-22. This was also the last Iron Bowl coached by Bear Bryant, Alabama's famous head coach, who retired after the season and then died 60 days after the Auburn game. We then move ahead to 1989. One of the big goals of the Pat Dye era was to get the Iron Bowl out of Legion Field and alternate between Legion Field and Auburn. Auburn always kind of playing on that road environment in Legion Field. And then Auburn was finally able to get the rivalry home. And Auburn ended up upsetting the number 2 Crimson Tide in the first ever Iron Bowl on Auburn's field, ending Alabama's national title hopes and sharing the SEC championship that year between Auburn and Tennessee and giving Auburn their 3rd straight conference championship. Bill Curry was fired after that season after failing to beat Auburn in 3 consecutive seasons. Then, next up, we have the 1993 edition of the Iron Bowl. Number 6 Auburn defeated number 11 Alabama 22-14. The game at Jordan-Hare Stadium was not televised due to Auburn's probation, but was shown on a closed-circuit television for 47,421 fans at Bryant-Denny Stadium. Auburn was able to beat Alabama that year. Auburn went undefeated in that probation year in 1993. An exciting ending, and Auburn won 22-14. Then, of course, how can you not forget this moment? Good old Cam Newton, who's back with the Panthers the last couple weeks. Auburn, undefeated Auburn, number 2 in the country, played number 9 Alabama. Auburn erased a 24-0 deficit, the largest comeback win in series history. This game is referred to as the comeback after Auburn Heisman Trophy winning quarterback Cam Newton that led the comeback. It is not a secret that Alabama had figured out Auburn's play signs, was watching Auburn call their plays, and then was obviously defending them very well because they knew exactly what Auburn was trying to do. Gus Malzahn and company went into the locker room at halftime, changed all the signals. Auburn was able to come back out, and then a famous moment in that Letzenkirchen play that gave Auburn the lead. There's a famous shot after that play where it shows Kirby Smart and Nick Saban, and you can read Kirby Smart's lips, and it says, "That's not the play they called." So just a crazy moment. Auburn was able to win that game, go on, beat Oregon in the national championship game. Then, who can forget this? I'd argue, Stan White said it on the radio broadcast. It's the greatest Iron Bowl ever. I don't know how you could ever top a game like this. Number 1 Alabama going for a three-peat in the BCS era. This was the final year of the BCS. Alabama going for a three-peat in SEC championships as well. Number 4 Auburn after that 3-9 season with first-year head coach Gus Malzahn able to turn it around. A very exciting back-and-forth game. Auburn was able to score with Sammy Coates with that triple option type play with just about a minute left. Alabama able to drive down close to around the 50-ish, 40-ish yard line. And then, of course, we all know there was 1 second left on the clock. Nick Saban argued, got the 1 second left. Alabama attempted a field goal. They had missed field goals earlier in the game, so a different kicker went up and tried to kick the longer field goal. They just barely missed it. It was a good kick. Let's be real. He just missed it. It was a little short because it was a 57-yard field goal. And then, of course, Chris Davis made history, returned the field goal for what has been coined as the kick six. Auburn goes on to beat Missouri in the SEC championship and gets to play Florida State for a national title. Truly one of the craziest plays in college football and maybe the greatest game ever. Then, just a couple years later in 2017, of course, it was the kick six. Charles Barkley called this one the kick ass, as Auburn was able to defeat number 1 Alabama, the second number 1 team Auburn had beaten in 3 weeks. They beat number 1 Georgia just a couple weeks prior, and Auburn won 26-14, propelling Auburn to the SEC championship game against Georgia, and then eventually a Peach Bowl against UCF. And then, honestly, an instant classic in 2019. In the first year of Bo Nix, Auburn was able to somehow, with 2 pick sixes, was able to defeat the Crimson Tide 48-45. Of course, Alabama attempted that field goal late in that game. Alabama kickers have struggled in Jordan-Hare to try and tie it. Had the doink. Auburn wins 48-45 in an Iron Bowl classic. And with that, we have number 86 coming up in just a little bit. That'll be on CBS. So it should be an exciting one. As we've all said, Nick Saban has struggled in Jordan-Hare. Could those struggles occur once more? So let's go ahead and get into our exclusive preview of the Iron Bowl between number 3 Alabama and Brian Harson's led Auburn Tigers. Let's go ahead and just talk about Alabama for a second. We'll talk about Alabama, Auburn. We'll do some player profiles, and then we'll get on out of here. So when you look at Alabama in this matchup. I think one thing that is so key, Alabama's defense has not been quite as good as in years past. A big thing that Alabama struggles with is their pass defense. For whatever reason, they struggle with their pass defense. A lot of teams have been able to exploit that and to be able to stay in games. Alabama has struggled with closing out games against LSU, Arkansas. But they've won those games. Now, they did lose Texas A&M. But a big key is, could Auburn try to exploit that passing defense weakness by Alabama? Now, at the same time, their defense is one of the tops in the nation at stopping the run. So Tank Bigsby might not have as explosive as a day, but Auburn is definitely going to have to establish that run to win. Now, when you look at Alabama's offense, we all know Bryce Young has had an incredible year. He's in the Heisman race. He might be a Heisman favorite. I don't know. Of course, he's got a big game next week against Georgia that will likely decide that if he, were to somehow win. But Bryce Young, just the sophomore, has been incredible. He's been able to pick teams apart all year. He's not really that big of a runner, while he can run, though. But his passing game, a big thing for Auburn. A big thing for Auburn, as we kind of talk about Auburn now, is can Auburn get Bryce Young uncomfortable? If Bryce Young is, this is just there's been a lot of questionable things with Derek Mason. But at the same time, he knows infinity, way more about defense than I do. So who am I to criticize him? But in my opinion, the Patrick Bingham opinion, and of course I'm not the coach. There's a reason I don't get paid to do all that. But in the Patrick Bingham opinion, I think if you drop 8 and you only rush 3 and you can't get pressure, the Alabama receivers are eventually going to get open. And he's going to be able to pick Auburn apart and go right down the field. I think Auburn is going to have to blitz. They're going to have to send multiple people. They're going to have to disguise blitzes. Whatever it takes, Auburn has got to sack the guy, and they've got to get pressure. Because if Auburn can't get pressure and get him uncomfortable, the stadium will get quiet. It'll be sad. I'll be crying in my seat, and it'll be over. They'll just be able to pick us apart and they'll win. But Auburn's going to have to be able to get pressure on Bryce Young, get him uncomfortable, and get that stadium loud, because that is when Alabama has struggled the most. So we'll see. Let's go ahead and look at our Iron Bowl player profiles, and we start with the Auburn quarterback. Not who we thought would start the Iron Bowl when we started the season, maybe who you might have thought would start the Iron Bowl after that Georgia State game, but then, of course, Bo Nix really got into his own, but then with that injury, TJ Finley started last week in Auburn's loss against South Carolina, and of course he'll start again today. This season, Finley has thrown for 463 yards with 3 touchdowns. Of course, he's literally only played pretty much in meaningful time in 2 games. So, the stats are well, that sucks. Well, there's a reason he wasn't supposed to be playing. You know what I'm saying? He's the backup. So, we'll see. TJ's going to have a big game. A big thing with him is, don't get sacked. I don't know what to say. Make smart decisions. Just pray for the guy. I don't know what to say. At this point, I don't know. TJ Finley's going to have a really good day. A big thing is we're going to have to be accurate on the passes. They always talk about how strong of an arm he has, blah, blah, blah. Auburn's going to have a good passing game to win. Can he exploit that Alabama weakness? That's the biggest thing. Now let's look at Bryce Young, a Heisman finalist. Bryce Young has had a great season, thrown for 3,584 yards with 38 touchdowns this season for the Crimson Tide. Big key for them is Auburn does truly have a pass weakness, a pass defense weakness, and really a pass weakness on offense. But I think he'll be able to exploit it if he is able to have enough time to stand back in the pocket and make his throws, a lot like Sean Clifford had this past when Auburn played Penn State. I think he'll do just fine. Now let's look at Tank Bigsby. There's been a lot of talk about Tank Bigsby this week because Tank Bigsby was left out of a lot of the important moments against South Carolina and Mississippi State. A lot of people upset. He's by far Auburn's best player on offense. I don't really understand why he wasn't in a lot of those big moments, but Auburn is going to have to use this kid however they can. He's by far the best player. The best players have got to play in the biggest moments. I'm a believer in that. Big players make big plays in big moments. I think Tank can do that. but he's got to be in the game. If he's on the sidelines, there's nothing he can do. He's as good as me. Like, I can go stand on the sidelines. Like, that doesn't take much. He's very talented. Auburn's going to have to utilize him. I wonder if Auburn could try and utilize him in the pass game, and if there's any way where Auburn could try to, I don't know, throw the ball to him because he's good at winning catches thing. If he could catch it and he could run, like that could work. I don't know. He needs to be in the game. He needs to be very active in this game if Auburn wants a chance against the Crimson Tide. Then, of course, on the other side, you have Brian Robinson for Alabama. People have been like, their running backs haven't been as good this year, blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, because they've been throwing it all around, and guess what? They're still really good. This season, on 191 attempts, he's rushed for 945 yards, so he could get his 1,000 yards regular season. He'll get 1,000 yards. He could get it, though, in the regular season against Auburn today. He's also had 14 touchdowns for Alabama. And then you look at the wide receiver for Auburn, Demetrius Robertson. He's not Auburn's top wide receiver, so you might be like, Patrick, why did you pick him? Well, Kobe Hudson, he returned to practice this week, but it's been non-contact. Cedric Jackson was a big key receiver against South Carolina. But this senior receiver, and what will be his last regular season game, got to turn it on. Auburn is going to need a big game out of their wide receiver room if they want to pull off this upset, and it's going to start with one of the team leaders in Demetrius Robertson. This season, he's had 32 receptions for 435 yards and 4 touchdowns. D-Rob is going to have to get this thing going if Auburn is going to want to be able to upset the Tide in Jordan-Hare Stadium. And then for Alabama, John Mechie III Jr. has been truly incredible this season. He's had 77 receptions for 895 yards and 7 touchdowns. He's going to be a big key. I mean, of course, we all remember that 19 Iron Bowl when they had Judy and Devontae Smith. John Mechie, they just had all these wonderful receivers, and it's just like, oh my gosh. Their receivers are good. They're not necessarily that good, but they're going to have to play a great game. I don't know what to say. It is going to take a near-perfect attempt to beat Alabama. But when I say that, I think the key is that when you play a team like Alabama, if you're just about as talented as them, you got to play them straight up. Auburn doesn't have to come out with every trick play in the bag. I mean, Auburn's playing from a deficit. They don't have their starting quarterback. They don't have Owen Papo. There's a lot of things going against Auburn. They don't have their kicker. Auburn's going to have to throw out some crazy things, and there's going to have to be some crazy things that are going to have to happen if Auburn wants to pull this off. But to some extent, you can't go for it every time on 4th down. You do have to play with your head, too. You got to play them straight up because you don't want to just give them freebies and just let them beat you easily. They at least make it hard. Be competitive, people. So, there's a lot to be said. There's a lot to be said about the Brian Harsin era. There's a lot to be said about the position Auburn's in. It's not been a November to remember. It has been a November that we can all forget. But like I said, maybe Auburn can just wake up and beat Alabama. It goes against everything. But if there's been one thing this season, Auburn's been consistently pretty inconsistent. So we will see what happens. Of course, it's year one, so I'm not saying I'm not a believer. All the things it's been a tough season. But please God, not the Birmingham Bowl. Not the Birmingham Bowl. I don't want to do the Birmingham Bowl. If you listen to my podcast, it is called Please Not the Birmingham Bowl. We are begging college football gods. Not Birmingham. Not again. Not again. We already went there. That's so embarrassing. We did win the Birmingham Bowl. We got a trophy. We won't talk about that one, though. But as we look to close out the program, got something special. So, as you might know, I'm a high school senior going to Auburn next year. So, where you go. If you didn't already know, I'm an Auburn fan. If you've been watching all this time and you didn't know, I do prefer a certain team over another. So, this could be our last Party Pregame. I don't think it will be, but you never know. But I wanted to highlight, this will now be the 5th Iron Bowl that the Patrick Purdy's covered, starting back in 2017. And so, TBH, I haven't filmed this weekend's edition of the picks. I'm going to do it live. I'm going to do it on campus in the atmosphere of tailgates. So, of course, you can't show that on pregame if it hadn't happened yet. But I was like, you can't end with no picks. So what we're going to do is we are going to highlight the past 4 seasons of my Iron Bowl Rivalry Week edition picks. So before we look forward, let's take a step back and remember the Patrick Party, the previous 4 Iron Bowls.
The Patrick Party's back for our Rivalry Week edition right here next to College Game Day in Sanford Hall. Let's get started with our rivalry picks. We have Texas A&M, LSU. Kevin Sumlin potentially could get fired right after the game. Interesting game in Death Valley. I do think Ed Orgeron's team has been playing really well since that Alabama loss, and I do think they'll pull it out in Death Valley, bringing Texas A&M to a 7-5 record just like last year. We also have Notre Dame, Stanford, 8-21. Interesting game. Bryce Petty is in consideration for the Heisman, and I do think they will beat Notre Dame. I do think Notre Dame has fallen apart after that just fallout in Miami a few weeks ago in Hard Rock Stadium. And then we also have Clemson, South Carolina, the Palmetto Bowl. Interesting game. I believe it is in Columbia. I think it'll be close, but it'll be a lot like South Carolina's Georgia game. Clemson's just the better team when they'll pull it out in the end. And then the game here, Auburn, Alabama, the Iron Bowl, 1 versus 6. It's a good game. I do think Auburn will pull it out. Jarrett Stidham's going to make some plays at the end to hopefully help Auburn win. Here at Game Day in Sanford Hall, have a great college football Saturday from the Patrick Party. The Patrick Party's here in Tuscaloosa, Bryant-Denny Stadium in the Iron Bowl. But first, Tennessee plays Vanderbilt, trying to get Bill eligible. I think the Volunteers will do it. First year under Jeremy Pruitt. LSU plays A&M. It's a big game. I think the Tigers are going to play tough, but I think the Aggies will pull the upset in College Station. And then Notre Dame plays USC. I think easy win for the Irish to get to the playoffs. Oklahoma State plays TCU, and I think Oklahoma State will win. They've had ups and downs this season. Then Auburn plays Alabama here in the Iron Bowl in Tuscaloosa, and I think the Auburn Tigers are going to pull off the upset and win. That's all here from the Patrick Party. The Patrick Party is here in Jordan-Hare Stadium. It's calm before the storm, but tomorrow it'll be rocking for the Iron Bowl. First, we'll make our picks. You have Bedlam. It's Oklahoma State. It's going to be a great matchup, but I think the Sooners and Jalen Hurts will get another big win. Texas A&M will travel to Baton Rouge to play the number 2 Tigers. I think after what happened last year, LSU is going to really roll on them. Then you have Wisconsin, Minnesota, biggest game in Minneapolis in a long, long time. The Golden Gophers look good, but I think the Badgers and Jonathan Taylor will get another win. Then you have the game, Michigan, Ohio State. Michigan could maybe pull the upset in Ann Arbor, but Justin Fields and the Buckeyes have looked really good. Then, here in Jordan-Hare Stadium, Auburn and Bo Nix freshman quarterback will take on backup quarterback Mac Jones and the Alabama Crimson Tide. I think it's going to be a close game, very low scoring. I think the Tigers will pull out with the win over the Tide tomorrow night. That's all here from the Patrick Party in Jordan-Hare Stadium. Welcome into the Patrick Party here, Thanksgiving and Rivalry Weekend. Man, we have a lot of big games in store this Saturday. Well, let's go ahead and get it started first. You have Florida, Kentucky, a big-time matchup. I like the Gators big in this one. They're on their road to Atlanta, and I don't think anybody's going to stop them. I think we'll see a Florida, Alabama, big SEC championship game, but I like the Gators. Then you have Georgia, South Carolina. Well, Muschamp obviously fired. And I think with that, South Carolina has no hope, especially since they beat them last year. The Dogs will be ready, and I think JT Daniels will have another big day for Georgia. Then you have LSU, Texas A&M. LSU beat the crap out of Texas A&M last year. I think A&M's going to reverse it to them this year. The last time they played in Kyle Field was that crazy overtime game. I think A&M gets another big win as they look to maybe even sneak into the playoffs. We'll see how that goes. Then you have Auburn, Alabama, the 85th edition of the Iron Bowl. It'll be in Bryant-Denny Stadium. Auburn has never lost in Bryant-Denny Stadium when Nick Saban has not been on the sideline. The only person to actually beat Alabama in Bryant-Denny Stadium when Nick Saban was coaching for them, that guy right up there. So we'll see how this one goes this weekend. But there's some key injuries. Tank Bigsby, multiple offensive linemen that the Tigers will need to be healthy and effective if they want to pull upset and spoiler to the Tide's hopes of having a perfect season. I like Auburn in this one. I think Gus Malzahn has outcoached Nick Saban multiple times in previous Iron Bowls, and I think they're going to do it again. I think Auburn will have won 3 out of the last 4 Iron Bowls, but we'll see how it all goes down. That defense is going to have to be stellar for the Tigers if they want to slow down Mac Jones and that fleet of wide receivers. But I like the Tigers nonetheless big in Bryant-Denny Stadium. So that's going to be our picks here for our Rivalry Weekend edition of the Patrick Party. We'll be back next week for more college football and basketball coverage. Alrighty, so that was a look back. As we look forward with our big games today, we'll have our picks. They'll be on all of our social media, so be on the lookout
for that at the Patrick Party for our upcoming picks. But I'll go ahead and make my Iron Bowl pick. So I've never picked against Auburn. I've never done it. And I've been told that this week. I said, Patrick, you've always picked Auburn. What are you going to do? And, your heart's telling you one thing, but your brain's telling you another thing. But at the end of the day, I do think Auburn's going to win. Why do I think Auburn's going to win? Honestly, couldn't tell you. But it would just be the most Auburn thing ever. Let's be real for a minute. What other team would just lose all these games and then go beat Alabama? It's major Auburn vibes, which is consistently inconsistent, is pretty much the definition of Auburn, and I think it could, once again, happen again today. So that's my pick. But, of course, our full Saturday slate of picks will debut on all of our social medias coming up in about 2-ish hours. So that's going to do it for Patrick Party Pregame. Thank you for joining us this college football season. It's been a lot of fun waking up on Saturday mornings to talk about some football. So enjoy your college football Saturday. And, of course, War Eagle, everybody.